You will be amazed to know that why Google open sourced Kubernetes. And let me tell you the actual reason. The reason was a cloud war between the hyperscalers, especially AWS and Google. Let us see how it all happened. Google wants to keep the web open and force companies like Apple to follow open standards. And why Google wants to do this? Because the more open the web is, the more users that Google can reach with search, ads, YouTube's maps, etc., and more revenue to Google. So if you see this breakdown of revenue of Google, so you will see the main business of Google is ads and YouTube mainly. So this blue and yellow portion, both combined, are showing to you as ad share, and this red portion is the YouTube ads revenue. Okay, and rest all are the other businesses. So somehow Google wants to keep the web open because till the time the devices, the softwares are not open, Google cannot push its own services or businesses to them. So that is the reason they wants to keep it open. Now, back in the earlier decade, around 2010 to 2015, AWS got the first mover advantage in cloud computing, obviously. And everyone was writing code that somehow locked them into the AWS way of doing things. Okay, and ECS was one of such pain point, which means developer were developing these images, these softwares based on containers. They were writing container images, and they had no other option than AWS ECS to manage those containers. So let's say if the developer now wants to move their application outside AWS, but they cannot have ECS into some other environment because this is only AWS solution. So somehow they felt that there are closed APIs which are not giving them full freedom to operate with the software, and what to do outside AWS, right? So for example, if I want to move my application to Azure, let's say at that time, but I can move the application onto Azure containers, but how to manage them? There was no Azure Container Manager available at that time, right? So this was a blocking point with the developers developing their applications on containers. And there were other container managers in the market like Docker Swarm, Mesos, etc. But they had their own challenges. So some of them had a very high learning curve, very difficult to learn, and some of them were very complex to establish or to deploy, to set up at the very first phase. So there was not an easy way for applications to be portable between infrastructures because of unavailability of a common container manager. So this was the main reason of having blocking somehow with the development of totally free applications, totally free applications in context of developers ecosystem. Okay, so there was no container manager available which was common to all the infrastructures, and that is why the application portability was not possible between the infrastructures. So Google encashed this opportunity, and what they did, they open sourced Kubernetes, bringing the entire industry under one umbrella, which means now the developers working into different organizations started building their apps centered around Kubernetes. That means to build applications without AWS's vendor lock-in. And this was exactly the same way the Google wanted. Google wanted people to develop their applications not the way of AWS, instead the way they wanted them to develop. So they were still developing applications, but now they are managing their containers, they are managing their workloads more, more freely via Kubernetes. As a result, Amazon ECS was broken down by Kubernetes, and Amazon had to launch EKS in 2018. So ECS has been hardly used as of now. I mean, no more used. And AWS has to launch EKS. So remember this change from C to K. This was Amazon's proprietary solution of managing containers, Elastic Container Service. But EKS is Elastic Kubernetes Service, which means simply putting this Kubernetes onto AWS platform to manage any containers, okay? Any container based workloads basically. So AWS had no other option because all the developers were moving away from AWS and they were developing their own container images without AWS environment. Because Kubernetes was available for everyone as an open source project. So people downloaded this in their private data centers, in their developer machines, personal PCs, and start developing the applications. So they had no other option than to bring Kubernetes into their environment also. The reference of this material was the Kubernetes documentary by Honeypot, which was just released in 2021. So I would request you to please have a watch of this documentary. This is available in YouTube. Now, with this launch of Kubernetes, competitors gained a comparative edge in the cloud space. What does that mean? Azure, companies like Microsoft, Red Hat, VMware, or Rancher, they got benefited because of this war between AWS and Google. So they have got Kubernetes for free for their environment. So everybody started building the container manager around Kubernetes into their environment. So Azure hosted AKS, which is Azure Kubernetes Service. Okay, Red Hat OpenShift was built around Kubernetes after that. So this is having Kubernetes in its core. Simply and in a similar way, VMware developed Tanzu, Rancher developed Kubernetes engine. Okay, so all these managers came into market after the launch of Kubernetes. So this has somehow suppressed Google from gaining its advantages. Means Google might have launched Kubernetes as its own proprietary product, but they had a longer vision. They had a wider vision than that, and they gifted this whole project to the open source community so that everybody can use it. This was just to break Amazon's monopoly into the container development or container management market. So mainly it is the same strategy as Google did for Android in 2008. So if you remember this revolution, every mobile device manufacturer had to use Android since its launch. Why? Because it is free. It is an absolutely free operating system available for every manufacturer. So keeping this strategy, Google pushed Android in all the mobile devices, and now all the development of mobile applications is Android based development. So Google can push all their businesses like ads, YouTube, or search, or any other business into any mobile device wherever they want. So by simply setting this Android free to the market, they have captured a very wide domain of customers via their other services, which is their main business. So this was the reason for releasing Kubernetes as an open source. So somehow Google has, suppressed its own advantages, but in the long run, they are getting benefited from the development which is centered around Kubernetes now.